First described as a potential surrender, then as deception, and now I think parties in the U.S. government acknowledging that Ismael Zambada Garcia, El Mayo, ended up in the United States on July 25th as a result of a kidnapping. You're going to want to stay tuned to the end of this video. I'm going to explain why this is a big win for the United States, and most likely it's not for the reasons that you think or for the reasons that you've heard from other people. First, though, let's talk about what happened and how it happened. I think Joaquin Guzman, the son of El Chapo, he had been trying for some time to set up a meeting with El Mayo, a very specific type of meeting, a meeting where Mayo would attend with a limited security contingent. And it sounds like he was able to do that, and that's what happened on July 25th. It sounds like a meeting was set up in the city of Culiacan, a specific neighborhood called the Huertos de Pedregal neighborhood, at a house. And from what I know, El Mayo arrived with about a half dozen people, a personal assistant, and then maybe 4 bodyguards and a driver, or 5 bodyguards. Not really clear what role a couple of the people played. So they enter the residence. This is El Mayo enters the residence, and immediately there's an ambush, and armed people wearing military-style uniforms confront them and forcibly take Mayo into custody. Now, the military uniforms, what to make of that? Well, it could only be one of two things. Narcos in Mexico, it's very common to wear military-style uniforms. It's intimidating. It gives them the air of professionalism as well. So that could very well be the case. It's just hired gunmen who dress up as if they're military people. Or, to be honest, it could also be military people. It's not unheard of for drug cartels, drug trafficking organizations to actually hire military or law enforcement units to do this type of work for them. It's been documented in the past, and it's very possible that that's what happened in this case. However it specifically happened, the security detachment for El Mayo, let's talk about that. 4 of those people in that detachment, the bodyguards, have not been seen or heard from since, at least according to reporting in Mexico. The other 2 people, a personal assistant and a 6th person whose role was a bit unclear to me, they managed to somehow escape. Interesting, right? So the politician that was there was a 3rd person at that meeting, and I should have probably mentioned that at the onset. Not only was Mayo told that the meeting was going to be with Joaquin, he was also told that it was going to be with a politician named Hector Malesio Cuen. Now, Hector was the former mayor of Culiacan, and if I'm not mistaken, he still holds some type of government job or government office in Mexico. Why would he be there? What would be the business they'd be discussing with him? We'll have to wait and see what else comes out on that. But what is very interesting is the fact that he was going to be at this meeting. That was enough to get Mayo to come down from his hiding place, or his spot up in the mountains. And also what I think is significant in the reporting out of Mexico now is that that evening, after the flight touched down in New Mexico, after that people found out what had happened, Hector Malesio Cuen was actually shot in Mexico. Now, I don't know if he survived or not. I'm having a little difficulty finding that out, but he was attacked and shot. So one would think that that was revenge for being involved in this meeting. Well, really only one of 2 things: either revenge for being involved in this meeting and setting up El Mayo, or on the other hand, shot for being a witness to what happened and just trying to leave no witnesses behind. That could very well be what it was as well. So now let's talk about what happens to Mayo. How does he get from this nice neighborhood in Culiacan, Sinaloa, to Santa Teresa, New Mexico? Witnesses at Santa Teresa Airport report they got off a Beechcraft twin-engine plane, a King Air. First off, I worked for DEA for 32 years. I've been on King Airs many times. The King Air is a favored airplane of the U.S. government because of its versatility. It's an incredible airplane. It has great utility. It can do a bunch of different things. A lot of government agencies have them, use them. Interesting that a King Air was the plane they deplaned from at Santa Teresa Airport. What else is interesting, though, is in the day or two after these events took place, the Mexican government began their own investigation, and I've seen reports that they have created, leads, so to speak, of what they were following up on, and they believed, at least initially, that it was potentially a Cessna 205 that actually flew Joaquin Guzman and El Mayo out of Mexico into Santa Teresa, New Mexico. Now, I'm not sure how they arrived at that, but they had a copy of a flight plan. They had the pilot identified by name. I'm certainly not going to identify who that pilot is or give the tail number to this plane, but I was able to track this person down, and I spoke to this person today. And to be clear, this person denies all involvement with this. Says that he travels to Mexico frequently on his own personal plane for leisure, and he had nothing to do with it. He filed a flight plan on the evening of the 24th, left Mexico the 25th, and there were people at that airport in Hermosillo, Mexico, that would verify that he got on the plane alone, that Mayo and Joaquin were certainly not with him. And he says the same thing about arriving in the United States at Santa Teresa. He says that he cleared U.S. Customs there, and he says those customs people will verify that he was the only person on the plane. Who knows, right? Who knows at this point why the government of Mexico really kind of honed in on this gentleman and this specific plane? We're still looking into that. So a couple more things. Don't forget, Ovidio Guzman was, at least according to public records, the Bureau of Prison locator information for Ovidio Guzman. It shows that on July 23rd, he was released from custody. Now, who was Ovidio? Ovidio is another son of Chapo Guzman. And why would he be released from custody 2 days before this event takes place? Let's look at that. Originally, my thought was he was probably released from BOP to the custody of the U.S. Marshals. The Marshals would transport him to wherever Joaquin was going to be taken. In other words, Joaquin arrived at Santa Teresa Airport, New Mexico, was quickly put on another plane. He had agreed, remember, to surrender. And wherever he was flown to, let's say it was potentially Chicago, Ovidio would be taken by the Marshals to Chicago to meet his brother there, and they would work on some type of package plea deal or package cooperation agreement. That's one possibility. Second possibility is that Ovidio Guzman may have been actually very involved in setting up El Mayo and accomplishing this kidnapping. Well, how would he do that? He would do that with the help of U.S. law enforcement. They would get him out of custody, out of U.S. Marshal custody, and they would obviously remain with him and control his activities, but they would allow him to work the telephone, communicate with his brother Joaquin in Mexico, and put this deal together to accomplish the kidnapping, contact the people needed to make it happen, etc. That's a second possibility. Third possibility is that he now is in witness protection and he will never again be identified in Bureau of Prison records as Ovidio Guzman. It's possible that he has, reached a cooperation deal with his brother, Joaquin, and that part of that deal is they're going to be in witness protection in the U.S. federal prison system for however long that is. And on the 23rd, he was removed under the name Ovidio, and who knows now what name he's under, where he's located, etc. We just don't know. Finally, the one suspicious thing about the plane and pilot that the Mexican government identified, as I spoke to the pilot, he said he did fly into Mexico on July 23rd. Now, that's interesting that July 23rd was the day that Ovidio was released, and that this pilot who the Mexican government has keyed on, he acknowledges that he flew his plane into Mexico on the 23rd, stayed there the 24th, and returned on the 25th. But again, to be clear, he says he has no involvement in this. And I do not believe that U.S. authorities would allow Ovidio to go into Mexico. And I also don't believe that there was any type of trade deal trading Ovidio for Joaquin. I think much more likely Ovidio was taken from BOP custody to work the telephone and help assist in this capture operation. or he's in witness protection now, and he's never again going to be identified in BOP records as Joaquin Guzman. I guess another issue to talk about is, does it matter? Does it matter how Joaquin Guzman and El Mayo arrived here? Well, Joaquin, it was voluntarily, so no, in his case, it doesn't matter. For El Mayo, there will be an argument made that it matters. But in an earlier video, I talked about the case of Dr. Mashine, someone who was kidnapped by informants working on behalf of DEA in the 80s. He was transported to the border, dumped across the border where Border Patrol agents picked him up, booked him, and he appeared in court in Los Angeles. Now, in that case, the judge in that case called that gross government misconduct, if I'm recalling correctly. And he dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning that Dr. Mashine could not be charged again. And Dr. Mashine was released. The U.S. appealed that decision, and eventually that case went to the Supreme Court. Now, my recollection is that the Supreme Court reversed that decision. But at that time, Dr. Mashine had already been released, had already returned to Mexico. But my recollection is the Supreme Court said at that time, it doesn't really matter how you got here. You're still subject to the criminal case. Now, you may have an action against the U.S. government. In other words, El Mayo could sue the U.S. government for kidnapping him and bringing him against his will to the United States. But the remedy to that, if he won his lawsuit, the remedy to that would not be he gets released and he doesn't have to face the criminal charges. The Supreme Court has said those are basically two different things. He may sue the United States and win, and I guess could potentially be awarded a cash settlement even, but he's still got to face the criminal case. And you lawyers out there, especially people with international law experience, weigh in on this and tell me if I have this correct. Is it two distinct issues? A claim against the United States for the kidnapping versus being here and facing the criminal charges. I'm curious to hear the answer to that. I did think it was significant that the U.S. officials that were quoted by all the media outlets said that Joaquin had no cooperation agreement in place prior to arriving here. And that could be significant because that makes it more difficult for El Mayo to say that this kidnapping was part of a, quote, government operation, unquote. And here's why. If Joaquin had a cooperation agreement, had agreed formally to cooperate with the United States, the argument could be made that he was an agent of the U.S. government doing this kidnapping. And, you know, that just muddies the waters a little bit. Again, in the criminal case, would it matter? My interpretation of the Supreme Court ruling is no, it wouldn't matter. But you know, it could potentially leave a jury thinking that it's improper, that it's gross government misconduct, and they may not like it if a jury hears that information. Now, would a jury ever hear that information? Would how El Mayo was brought to the United States come up in trial? Probably not. A judge probably would not let that in because it has nothing to do with the actual criminal charge. He would probably bar them from bringing that in. But again, all these things are judges' decisions, and they can go either way, and then they're appealed and whatever. And I did take notice of the fact that U.S. was trying to make it clear that there was some distinction, that Joaquin did not have a cooperation agreement at the time this happened. And again, I think that's to try to clean this up a little bit and make it go smoother down the road. So finally, as promised, why is this such a big win for the United States? What will be the biggest impact from this? And yes, in the short term, I think it will have an impact on drug flow into the United States just because of disorganization within the Sinaloa cartel now, perhaps infighting, having to divert resources to infighting between the different cartel factions, the Mayo faction, the Chapitos faction. But really, here's what this case shows the Mexican government. This case shows the Mexican government that U.S. authorities have the ability to reach deep into Mexico without involving U.S. law enforcement personnel in Mexico, and more importantly, without involving the Mexican government. They can reach deep into Mexico and make significant arrests of high-level traffickers. And that, I guarantee, that was a big shock to the Mexican government. It's an embarrassment to the Mexican government because Mayo's been operating in their country for 15 or so years. dozens and dozens of actionable leads have been passed to the Mexican government on Mayo Zambada and other Sinaloa cartel traffickers. And I had firsthand knowledge of this when I worked at DEA Special Operations Division. And each time operations would be compromised or they would be ineffective. Only infrequently were traffickers ever caught. Guess what? This shows the Mexican government that that U.S. authorities have the reach. They don't really need their assistance. It's a new day today where they're going to get creative and a little bit treacherous, and they can affect operations deep into Mexico without the Mexican government even knowing it. That is super significant, and don't think for a minute that this won't bring Mexican authorities to the table to be more cooperative with the United States going forward. It definitely will, and I think that's the most significant part of this whole arrest.